It feels life's ecstasies and life's tragedies with equal intensity and passion. That's what Romanticism is all about. History of literature, or the history of the arts, or the history of anything. What you will see is that in one period, certain things, certain values, certain ways of looking at the world are seen to be natural, inevitable, they make sense. In the Middle Ages, it made sense to view everything from the point of view of eternity, the point of view of faith, the point of view of God, the point of view of sort of theological philosophy, which they call ecclesiastical philosophy or scholastic philosophy. That seemed as natural to them as computers, highways, and electric toothbrush, in which a world that was defined purely in spiritual, theological, divine, Christian terms no longer seemed big enough. There needed to be more, something a little bit more basically human, something that dealt with the ordinary passions and the ordinary experiences of life in a more colorful and intense and human and concrete way, and there needed to be more knowledge about that and examples of how to do that, how to think about political reality, how to think about emotional reality, how to think about personal reality, and all the rest of it. And so what you get, of course, is that great period of culture that we call the Renaissance, in which the rediscovery of the classical past is carried on, that is, of classical Greece and Rome, not because they were interested in just going back and raking up old stuff, but because they were looking for models of how to live life fully on a human and secular basis. Now, that does not mean that Christianity disappeared in the Renaissance. It most certainly did not. But it was blended with another great force that you can call Renaissance humanism, if you want to, that involved a new definition of reality that was combined, sometimes harmoniously, sometimes not so harmoniously, with the Christianity of the Middle Ages to produce a new culture. All you have to do is look at Dante from the Middle Ages with his vision of life that is all in terms of infinitude, eternity. For Dante, where is reality? It's Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso, right? That's where that is. It's hell, purgatory, and heaven. That's where reality is to be found. That's typical of the Middle Ages. When Shakespeare comes along, who is perhaps the greatest poet of the Renaissance in Europe, where does he see reality as being? Look around. See human beings from top to bottom and east to west. See them in all of their complex human reality. We do not have a single Shakespearean play that takes place in hell, do we? Or in heaven, or purgatorio. His vision is not up and down, it's across. It's latitudinal. It's looking at human reality in an ordinary sort of human way. That's typical of the Renaissance. Can you think of any other Renaissance writer who looked to a somewhat more common sense and reasonable, middle-of-the-road, balanced sort of reality? It felt that it could understand things to a serious degree through the exercise of the analytic reason. Whereas in the Renaissance it had been much more a matter of sort of will and determination and Machiavellian cleverness and all the rest. But in the Renaissance, in the Neoclassical age, and when does that begin? In England, about 1660, the Neoclassical age began. It happens in part because Charles II, who was the victim of one of the surges of Renaissance energy, which we call the English Civil War. And he did come back in 1660. That's called the restoration of the English monarchy. And with it comes not only the restoration of the English monarchy, but really the development of neoclassical literature in England. And why would that happen? Because when Charles II was over in France, he was at the court of Louis XIV. And Louis XIV, the Sun King, was not only the great monarch of Europe, he really was. He presided over the most powerful nation in Europe, but it wasn't just powerful in military or economic terms. It was also cultural, by far the most powerful nation in Europe. It was producing writers like Molière and Racine and Corneille and La Fontaine. and La Bruyere, and these names, some of them will maybe mean something to you, some may not, but trust me, they're important writers in their own way in France. They called the kind of style they were developing in the middle of the 17th century French classicism. And of course, this became neoclassicism in England when it was sort of transformed, developing in the middle of the 17th century French classicism. And of course, this became neoclassicism in England when it was sort of transferred or came over from France onto English soil. In this context, this neoclassical context, that the first elements of Romanticism began to develop. Partly, no doubt, as a kind of reaction against neoclassicism. Because neoclassicism was powerful, it was useful, it was highly creative, it produced a tremendous body of art and thought and architecture and music and literature that was of tremendous value. But like every other age that has ever come along, it inevitably sort of valorized or placed great stress on certain things and a whole lot less stress on other things. Now, what did it value? It valued, on the whole, common sense and reason over, well, imagination and feeling. That's an oversimplification, but basically speaking, it is true. It valued clarity and structure in almost everything it did, whether it was architecture, thought, or literature, over spontaneity and sort of coloring of that, or what I say, highly individual modes of expression. It valued city life over country life. If you've ever read what might be considered discursive, intellectual, and philosophical matters than personal, emotional, private sorts of matters. Say in certain ways, and we can look at some of the works that you read last night, it is looking for some alternative to the neoclassical world. The neoclassical world was civilized and elegant and polished, but maybe it was a little bit too civilized for some people. That is to say, wouldn't it be nice if we could at least occasionally get a glimpse of something wild and primitive and strange instead of things that are civilized, elegant, and rationally understandable? And that was one of the impulses, I think, that led, in other words, a kind of longing for, or a hunger for, the primitive, the heroic, the wild, the romantic. This is really what the word romantic originally meant. It simply meant something that was beyond ordinary, rational sort of consideration. You could have a romantic landscape, that is one that was too wild, in other words, not like a garden, but like a kind of wild, great mountains and soaring cliffs. That could be a romantic landscape, and that's the way the word was originally used. Or you could have a romantic feeling, but what that meant was it was originally not a positive thing at all. It meant a feeling that was not properly governed by reason, by intelligence, by decorum, and so forth. And you'll find in many 18th century novels someone saying,